Imagine a company spending hundreds of millions of dollars to dominate Formula One, only to walk away in disgrace 5 years later and sell their entire team for $1. That company was Ford, and the team they gave away for the price of a coffee. It became Red Bull Racing, the most dominant force in modern F1 history. Now Ford is back, returning to the same factory they abandoned, partnering with the same team they sold for nothing, betting everything on 2026. This time failure isn't just embarrassing, it's permanent. Ford didn't always fail at Formula One, and that's what makes this story so painful. Go back to the late 1960s through the 1980s, and you'll find Ford's name attached to some of the greatest victories the sport has ever seen. They weren't running a team, they were doing something smarter. Ford funded the legendary Cosworth DFV V8 engine, a piece of machinery so dominant it powered over 150 Grand Prix victories and helped capture 10 Constructors' Championships and 13 Drivers' titles across multiple teams. Names like Lotus, McLaren, and Tyrrell all won with Ford Cosworth engines humming behind their drivers. From Graham Hill's 1968 championship all the way to Michael Schumacher's first title with Benetton in 1994. Ford built a legacy as a championship-winning engine supplier without the headache of managing teams, dealing with drivers, or navigating the political minefield that comes with owning a Formula One operation. By the mid-1990s, Ford's reputation in F1 stood second only to Ferrari in historical success. A remarkable achievement built on technical excellence rather than corporate control. Then someone in Detroit had a different idea, and everything fell apart. In 1999, Ford Motor Company decided they wanted more than just their name on an engine cover. They purchased Stewart Grand Prix, a scrappy British team that had just won the European Grand Prix, and rebranded the entire operation as Jaguar Racing with plans to turn it into the British Ferrari. The ambition was intoxicating. The execution was a disaster that still haunts everyone involved. Ford's top executives made bold promises right from the start, talking about winning races in 2000 and securing a championship by 2002. Targets that proved so wildly unrealistic, they bordered on delusion. What followed wasn't just underperformance, it was a masterclass in how corporate culture can destroy a racing team from the inside out. The tight-knit, racer-friendly atmosphere that Jackie and Paul Stewart had built evaporated almost overnight, replaced by heavy corporate bureaucracy imported directly from Detroit. One Ford executive walked into a Jaguar engineering meeting and declared something that became infamous in the paddock: "You will do it the Ford way, or we will get someone else that will." That single sentence captured everything wrong with the program. The Ford way meant rigid management hierarchies, yes men making technical decisions they didn't understand, and a complete failure to grasp what makes Formula One different from building sedans in Michigan. Gary Anderson, who served as Jaguar's technical director in 2000, later described how Ford's bureaucracy tied engineers' hands and killed the risk-taking mentality that F1 demands. When Ford took over Stewart Grand Prix, Anderson said it was like a light switch was turned off, as the efficient, open culture got replaced by Detroit's top-down management overnight. Engineers grew afraid to speak up about problems, and issues festered because nobody wanted to be the one telling headquarters that their plans weren't working. The revolving door of leadership made everything worse. Jaguar cycled through team principals and technical directors so frequently that journalist Maurice Hamilton observed it made the operation look like an employment bureau rather than a slick F1 team. At various points, the team was led by Neil Ressler, Bobby Rahal, Niki Lauda, and Tony Purnell, each bringing new ideas that contradicted the previous regime's strategy, creating a chaotic environment where nobody knew what the actual plan was supposed to be. On track, the results matched the dysfunction perfectly. Over 5 seasons, Jaguar Racing never won a single race and scored exactly 2 podium finishes. A humiliating return considering Stewart GP had won a race in 1999, the year before Ford took over. Eddie Irvine managed a podium at Monaco in 2001, but such moments were rare flashes in an otherwise forgettable campaign spent fighting in the midfield. The cars were plagued by reliability problems and half-baked development, with Ford-owned Cosworth supplying the engines. Yet Jaguar engineers weren't even given full access to engine data because of internal silos within Ford's own corporate structure. Johnny Herbert, who drove for Jaguar, later described the negative corporate attitude as like a virus that spread through the team, sapping whatever morale remained. By 2003 and 2004, Ford's senior leadership had seen enough. Hundreds of millions of dollars spent, 0 wins to show for it, and no credible path to improvement in sight. Here's where the story takes its most humiliating turn. In September 2004, Ford announced they were pulling out of Formula One entirely, and they offered the Jaguar team for sale at a price that stunned the paddock: $1. Ford was willing to sell their entire F1 operation, the factory in Milton Keynes, all the equipment, the staff, everything, for less than the cost of a cup of coffee. The only condition was that any buyer had to commit to investing at least $400 million over subsequent years to keep the team competitive. Dietrich Mateschitz, the billionaire owner of Red Bull energy drink, jumped at the opportunity. He purchased Jaguar Racing for that single British pound and took control of the Milton Keynes facility in late 2004. Ford's grand experiment ended with the kind of exit that destroys reputations, handing off a team they'd promised would win championships to an energy drink company for essentially nothing. What happened next should have kept Ford executives awake at night. Red Bull Racing debuted in 2005 using the same factory, the same basic infrastructure, and many of the same people Ford had employed just months earlier. Freed from corporate interference and Detroit's bureaucratic stranglehold, the team immediately outperformed everything Jaguar had achieved. Red Bull finished 6th in the 2005 Constructors' Championship in their debut season, a result much better than Jaguar ever managed. And observers in Dearborn noted the bitter irony with dark humor. But Red Bull was just getting started. They hired Adrian Newey, arguably the greatest designer in F1 history, and built stable management under Christian Horner that stayed in place for years, the exact opposite of Jaguar's revolving door chaos. By 2009, Red Bull achieved their first Grand Prix victory. In 2010, just 6 years after Ford walked away, Red Bull won the World Championship and began a run of 4 consecutive titles from 2010 through 2013, with Sebastian Vettel behind the wheel. The same factory Ford sold for $1 became home to one of the most dominant teams in modern Formula One history. Maurice Hamilton captured the painful truth when he wrote that Red Bull won those championships, probably because there has been no interference from a misguided monolith 4,000 miles away. The potential had always been there. The problem was never the people or the facility. The problem was Ford trying to run Formula One like they ran their car factories in Detroit. Fast forward to February 2023, and Ford made an announcement that shocked the motorsport world. They were returning to Formula One after nearly 2 decades away, partnering with Red Bull Racing to develop the 2026 power unit that would run in both Red Bull and their sister team from 2026 through at least 2030. Ford was coming back to F1, and they were doing it with the exact team they'd sold for nothing. The timing wasn't accidental. Everything about the 2026 regulations aligned with where Ford wanted to take their business. The new F1 engines heavily emphasize hybrid technology with increased electrical power and 100% sustainable fuels, matching Ford's massive push toward electrification and carbon neutrality perfectly. Ford's CEO Jim Farley stated bluntly that Formula One's going green, and so are we as a company, acknowledging that for the first time in decades, F1's technical goals actually converged with Ford's road car strategy. The marketing opportunity was equally compelling. Formula One's popularity has exploded in the United States under Liberty Media's ownership, with Drive to Survive creating millions of new young fans and 3 American races now on the calendar. The sport is exploding in America. 3 races, a lot of young, diverse customers. That's who we want to sell EVs to, Farley explained, recognizing that F1 offered access to exactly the demographic Ford needed to win over as they pivoted to electric vehicles. Cost controls made the financial math work too. The FIA's budget caps mean teams now operate under spending limits around $135 million annually, roughly half of what top teams burned through in the early 2000s when Ford owned Jaguar. Engine manufacturers face similar constraints, making the investment more manageable and predictable than the uncontrolled spending that doomed Jaguar. But here's what makes this return fundamentally different from the Jaguar disaster, and why Ford believes they won't repeat history. Ford is not buying a team. They're not running operations. They're not installing Detroit executives to make racing decisions. Red Bull controls everything related to the actual team, the car design, driver choices, race strategy, all of it. Ford's role is purely as an engine partner, contributing technology in areas like battery systems, electric motors, control software, and combustion development, then letting Red Bull's proven racing organization handle the rest. This partnership structure is the polar opposite of how Jaguar worked. When asked about the arrangement, Motorsport journalists noted that Ford is staying out of team management in this partnership with Red Bull, likely still shuddering at its attempt to run Jaguar the Ford way. The company learned its lesson. They're not trying to control what they don't understand. They're playing to their strength, advanced powertrain technology, while letting the racing experts actually race. Christian Horner framed it perfectly when he said Ford brings an OEM's experience and a lineage that runs from Jim Clark to Ayrton Senna to Michael Schumacher, adding, "For us to open the next chapter of that dynasty as Red Bull Ford is tremendously exciting." Notice the framing. Red Bull is in charge. Ford is the supporting partner adding expertise and heritage, not the other way around. The stakes couldn't be higher for both parties, but especially for Ford's reputation. If this partnership works, and Red Bull Ford wins championships in the late 2000s, it rewrites Ford's entire Formula One legacy. Over 50 years after the Cosworth DFV's debut, Ford's name would again be on title-winning F1 engines, now hybrid electric and cutting edge, linking their heritage to their future in spectacular fashion. Success would boost Ford's brand appeal to the exact young, tech-focused audience they need for EV sales, and it would provide genuine technical learnings that improve their road car development. The glory would be immense. Championships would cement Ford alongside Mercedes, Renault, and Honda as manufacturers who conquered modern F1, erasing the bitter Jaguar memory with a triumphant comeback story. But if it fails, the narrative becomes brutal. Ford failed in F1 again, would haunt the company for generations, suggesting they can't compete in high-performance hybrid technology even when partnered with the best team in the sport. Another withdrawal would damage Ford's credibility in advanced engineering, right as they're trying to convince consumers to trust their electric vehicles. The investment would be sunk with nothing to show, and Ford would likely never return to Formula One again, given it took 20 years to come back after Jaguar. The technical risk is real and unforgiving. Engine regulation cycles in F1 lock in performance for years. If the 2026 Ford Power Unit launches with fundamental flaws, reliability issues, or a horsepower deficit, there's limited ability to recover because cost caps restrict development spending. Red Bull can adapt their chassis and strategy. Ford's reputation cannot be redesigned mid-season. The 2026 regulations also attract heavy competition. Audi is entering with Sauber. Honda is partnering with Aston Martin. Mercedes and Ferrari are developing their own new engines. If Ford arrives with a mediocre power unit while competitors excel, the comparison will be devastating and public every single race weekend. Farley and Ford's leadership know what's at risk. They evaluated every proposal for an F1 return over the years and chose this one specifically because, as Farley said, Formula One is about winning and we want to be with a winning team. They picked the reigning champions, removed every excuse by letting Red Bull control racing operations, and aligned the technical goals with their core business strategy. Ford already failed in Formula One once. They tried to run it their way, ignored what made F1 different, and sold the team for $1 in disgrace. This time they've structured everything differently. They're the partner, not the boss. They're contributing expertise, not imposing corporate bureaucracy. They're focused on engines and electrification, not managing drivers and designing chassis. The factory is the same. The partner is the team they once gave away. But the approach is completely different. Red Bull's success with the infrastructure Ford abandoned proved the potential was always there. Now, Ford gets a second chance to write their F1 story, backed by the world's best team and stripped of the arrogance that destroyed Jaguar. Whether this redemption arc succeeds or crashes into another humiliating exit will be decided on track starting in 2026. Ford has removed every excuse. They've learned from every mistake. All that's left now is the result, and the entire motorsport world will be watching to see if the Blue Oval can finally get Formula One right, or if history repeats itself with a different coat of paint on the same painful ending. So, here's the question every F1 fan should be asking. In 2026, will Ford power the fastest car on the grid, or be the weak link Red Bull can't design around? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section. If you're here for real F1 stories, regulation deep dives, and the politics behind the paddock, subscribe and stick around. This era is just getting started.